Welcome to our OMTech keynote webinar, Executive Insights on the State and Future of the Orthopedic Industry. I'm Carolyn Lowell, OrthoWorld's Chief Content Officer, and while I wish we were together in person at OMTech this morning, I'm thrilled that you are joining us for what I think will be a lively and timely discussion between leaders of innovative orthopedic companies. With OMTech, our aim is to provide orthopedic professionals like you solution-driven education that is backed by industry and complemented by supplier perspectives. So in addition to today's keynote, we will be hosting a second live keynote tomorrow. That keynote is on the shift of procedures from hospitals to ASCs. And we've also developed 25 on-demand webinars that address today's critical topics, from orthopedic market forecasts to smart manufacturing to product development. And you can access registration for tomorrow's keynote and the on-demand webinars at omtechexpo.com. To focus back on this webinar today, our sponsor is Orchid Orthopedic Solutions. Orchid is a worldwide manufacturing leader for the orthopedic market. The company is a true strategic sourcing partner that is designed for simplicity and speed to optimize solutions for orthopedic procedures. Orchid has the broadest portfolio in the industry, from concept to sterile packaged product, and Orchid can improve orthopedic device companies' product availability through its supply chain solutions. So thank you to Orchid. We appreciate your sponsorship of this keynote. Now to introduce our speakers. Our moderator is Lawrence Beagleson. Larry is a sell-side equity research analyst who serves as managing director of medical supplies and devices at Wells Fargo Securities. Joining him are three orthopedic executives who represent a diverse view of orthopedics ranging across market segments and company sizes, and they each bring decades of leadership in the industry. Jacob Paul is Senior Vice President and President of Cranial and Spinal Technologies at Medtronic. Benny Hagag is President of Microport Orthopedics, which is primarily a hip and knee replacement company. And Albert DaCosta is President and CEO of foot and ankle company Paragon 28. They will leave time for audience questions at the end of their discussion. So as questions come to mind for you, you can enter them in the Q&A area at the bottom of your screen. And with that, Larry, I would like to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Carolyn, and good morning, everyone. I'm Larry Beagleson, the medical device analyst at Wells Fargo, and I'm very pleased and flattered to have been asked to moderate today's session. Carolyn already introduced our distinguished panelists. So in terms of format, we'll begin with a moderated Q&A, followed by audience Q&A. Please send any questions you have through the Q&A function in Zoom, and the entire session is scheduled to last an hour. So let's begin with the Q&A portion. And I was going to start with COVID-19 and the recovery, but first I wanted to give our speakers the opportunity to introduce their companies, tell us a little bit more about what their companies do. Jacob, we'll start with you, even though I think your company probably needs no introduction here, but why don't we just get the company introductions out of the way first. Jacob?
Thanks, Larry. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be on this panel, and look forward to an engaging conversation. So I lead the cranial and spinal technologies business within Medtronic, and we are a mix of spinal implants, capital equipment, robotics, navigation, and other enabling technologies. And we're an independent operating unit within Medtronic.
Thank you. And Benny?
Thank you, Larry. I will start with saying that, again, thank you for the opportunity to come here to present, to talk about our industry and what we see as Microport Orthopedics. Microport Orthopedics is really built on the legacy of Wright Medical's reconstructive devices. Our orthopedic business is essentially, we're considered a mid-size, mid-tier company. We've been traditionally focused on conventional joint replacement implants, instruments, and surgical approaches. Since I joined the company in the beginning of last year, we started shifting our focus, trying to look more into technology driven, trying to understand what exactly does it mean to actually be a mid-tier company in this space, a global player that is transitioning into the technology space as well. Obviously, we all talk about digital surgery. It's a topic that we'll discuss today, and I'm sure that we'll hear more about it.
Thanks, Benny. And Albert?
Hello, my name is Albert DaCosta. I'd also like to thank you for the invite. It's great to be here. Great panel. Paragon 28 is a foot and ankle company. We're just over 10 years old, privately held, based out of Colorado. I'd like to say we're likely one of the most passionate people about the foot and ankle subject, and we're excited to be in a market where we feel like we could really contribute. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that. So let's jump in. The first question, I'm sure everybody is eager to hear from the panel on. It's a big question, so I wanted to break it up. On COVID-19, I'd love to hear the panel's view on how the recovery has played out so far. Where do you think we are relative to pre-COVID procedure volumes? How do you think about the backlog and how that impacts volumes in the second half of this year and maybe even into 22? Because some people think, it's going to take a long time to work through the backlog. And then the second part of the question is, I said this was a big question, what do you think the long-term implications of COVID is on the behaviors of hospitals, surgeons, and the industry? And hopefully we'll still have time for another question after this one, because it's definitely a big question. So Jacob, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Larry. So that's a great question. Overall, since we last saw a softness from the resurgence of COVID in January, we're seeing really good momentum. We're seeing ICU and hospital capacities around the US and really the world improving as the vaccine rollout is also picking up momentum. We believe that the long-term recovery is still underway, though. So the fundamentals are strong. I think it depends on which part of the country or the world you're talking to, but in some parts the backlog has come through. In other parts, it's still to be we're still seeing it. So I think that I'm really optimistic for next year. And if we look at in the US, we saw in our Q4, our last Q4 of our last fiscal year, we saw spine procedures very close to pre-COVID levels. And but some of the international markets continue to be challenged, but we are seeing a recovery. And then finally in neurosurgery, the referral channels for new patients is really coming back to normal levels. So we see this as a very positive trend. So to your second part of the question, the long-term implications, during COVID, we saw a lot of innovative ways to engage with customers and patients, virtual engagement, telehealth, and so forth. I think the lessons we've learned through that will persist, although it's slowed down a bit since the recovery, but I think that's a long-term trend. Value-driven innovation is also going to be key in areas like data and AI and robotics, and then finally the whole question of patient access and patient experience is really going to drive us to look for new solutions to work with our partners.
That's very helpful. We're going to dive into some of those topics later on this webinar. Benny, what are you seeing in joint replacement? And I'm interested to know also if you're seeing differences between the recovery for hips and knees.
So first of all, when we talk about COVID, I like to look at it as a global pandemic rather than something that is a localized behavior. When we talk about the global pandemic, obviously the behavior, the market response, recovery is at a different stage in each one of the continents or even countries around the world. And because of that situation, we're actually in our company are monitoring on a weekly basis the level of impact, level of recovery, level of new infection rate per country in each of the significant ones that we're actually doing business in, because it makes significant changes on the way we manage the business in each one of those markets and how we respond, how we behave. Just as an example, if we look at Japan, a very significant market for many of us in this industry, they just experienced a significant wave. They're currently recovering from it, but that significant wave obviously made an impact. So when we look at recovery and we think that we're based in the US and we're seeing recovery, obviously it's not the same around the globe. So looking at where we are today, so in the US, clearly we are seeing recovery, we are seeing stabilization of the services, but it's less of a V-shape than many people were expecting and more of a U-shaped recovery. We're seeing a bit softness still in the market. Part of it is because of patients and hospital behavior more than the actual recovery from COVID. What we've seen is that between the first and second dose of vaccines, patients were actually staying away from surgery, which was an unexpected behavior, something that we didn't plan in the beginning. We've seen it much more in Europe. We're seeing it now coming in Japan, where they're picking up with vaccines. We are seeing patients in the US after a significant period of time when they've been essentially sheltered at home, not even going to work, working from home, actually taking some vacation time, which obviously is adding to the softness in the industry. But overall, when we talk with surgeons, when we talk with the providers, we are seeing recovery. We are seeing now availability in the system that was not there a few weeks, few months ago. When we look at Europe, it's actually even to the point where there's more availability, more services that are offered by hospitals than patients are willing to take surgery at the moment. So that's actually an impact of the softness, the fact that patients are going and taking the vaccines. But we do believe that we will see it in the third quarter picking up momentum, because we'll see much more of the Europeans and obviously in the US, where we are already almost in full recovery. And we expect to see a significant pickup in third quarter and pretty much a normal business, potentially even slightly above business in the fourth.
Benny, just a follow-up question. Hips and knees, do you see a difference? And I'm curious how you're thinking about, the third quarter with like summer seasonality and people, a lot of people have not gone on vacation for over a year. Do you think that will have an impact on the third quarter?
So as I mentioned, first of all, when touching on your last question about vacation seasonality, so obviously the second quarter traditionally is a weaker quarter. So we are seeing the second quarter as a weak quarter right now. And again, as I mentioned, people are starting to get out of the house with the vaccines, and this happens in the US and outside of the US. And the first thing they want to do is get out, refresh, see the outdoors a bit before getting back to normal life, getting back to business and taking surgeries. So that's impacting the second quarter. We do expect to see in the beginning of the third that behavior continues, because obviously there's still vacation time, schools are off, and people are going to enjoy the time with the family in the outdoors. But at the same time, again, we're talking about recovery. We're talking about improvement in the third quarter, more in the second half of it. Looking at the changes in the business, in the industry, clearly we're seeing a significant increase in the penetration of hip versus knee. And this is global. It's not just with respect to US. We're seeing it in Japan. We're seeing it in the US. Hip has a flavor of trauma to it, and that's actually improving the benefits of hip compared to the knee that is more of an elective surgery. So when it comes to prioritizing cases, hospitals tend to prioritize hip if they need to. And that's why we see a shift towards hip. If we used to see hips versus knees somewhere in the 40 to to 60% ratio. Right now, we're much closer to 50-50, sometimes even with a favorism towards the hip side as well in certain markets. So clearly there is a shift, but again, we are starting to see the market stabilizing more. And as we enter into the end of the third quarter and into the fourth, I think that we'll see more of a normal behavior coming in.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Albert?
Yeah, I agree with what both Benny and Jacob are reporting. Foot and ankle is mostly elective, but within foot and ankle, we have a multitude of segments here. And so there's slight variations within, say, the Charcot versus bunion segment, but we are mostly elective market, which means that we expect to see typically Q4 is a really strong quarter for us. I think in general terms, and I'm seeing this worldwide, everybody's smarter about how to stay safe during a pandemic. I think business has learned so much about our personalities, our resilience, our ability to be nimble, our ability to be productive in this hybrid work environment. So I don't anticipate ever returning to a more normal work environment. This is our chance to really modernize our businesses, which I think a lot of us aspired to do. And we saw that we could do it during COVID. From the market's perspective, we are hearing reports from surgeons that there is a backlog of patients. Now it's a matter of prioritizing those cases. We saw a really strong Q4. January softened up a little bit. It was varied. We're seeing a much tighter regional, perspective on COVID. Some states are a little bit tighter. Some states are a little bit more back to normal. And that's true for the rest of the world as well. But overall, we're seeing that everybody's anxious not to go back to these extreme shutdown environments. And I think we're smart enough from what we learned in that phase one to not do that. So I'm expecting a really strong Q3 and Q4, even though we're seeing pre-COVID levels now. And Q4 for us last year was about 22% improved over Q4 the previous year. So we're optimistic about the recovery here.
That's great to hear. So let's get into some of the big trends, starting with technology, which is another big topic to cover. So it seems like the industry is at an inflection point for technology adoption. As we look at the pace of robotic adoption, the advent of digital and remote surgery, smart implants, etc. What role do each of you expect technology to play in orthopedics overall and your respective verticals, over the near, medium, and long term? Benny, why don't we start with you for perspective on joint replacement? How do you think about robotics, navigation, and personalized patient care?
So first of all, when we look at the orthopedic industry, obviously we've seen a significant shift in joint replacement with the introduction of robotics. There's a significant push right now. All the four ortho big dominant players have an offering in robotics, and there's a big competition around it. The mid-size, the mid-tier players, some of them already are with the same trend, have a play in robotics. Some of them don't. We in Microport Orthopedics don't have a play in orthopedic robotic at this point, but we believe that technology is here and it's here to stay in various forms and shapes. What we do see is a significant shift in the industry towards digital surgery, more of an informed surgeon, a surgeon that goes into the procedure with better knowledge, better understanding of the surgery, the patient, and what is needed for delivery. But what we believe that is very significant here is the focus on the episode of care, the ability to actually deliver the service provider, the surgeon and the hospital or the place of service, with better information, better knowledge, better control of the patient through digital technology that allows him to manage the patient, manage expectations, be more attractive to the patient through these type of services. And then during surgery, the ability to provide better care, better services with digital services that can support and provide better control over the outcomes. And then, as we all know, a significant element of it is the control of the patient at the end of the case, what happens after the patient goes home, where we all know today patients don't want to come back to the hospital because of the environment. And it's a lot about remote patient monitoring. It's a lot about how do you actually manage the patient, how do you control behavior, and also manage expectations in order to get the patient as compliant as possible, which is a significant element of recovery. So these are the things we believe are going to dominate the industry beyond just the pure investment in the capital equipment. We do see that obviously during COVID, we've seen a significant pain point for the hospital on their profitability, which is impacting their appetite now for significant capital investments. We can talk about that element more later, but again, that's my view of the situation.
That's very helpful. And Albert, how are you thinking about, applying technology to extremities?
Yeah, I've got to tell you, first of all, I agree completely with what Benny said. And two, this is a real hot button for Paragon 28. I think advanced technologies are going to drive the future of medicine, specifically going to drive the future of foot and ankle. Foot and ankle is the youngest segment of orthopedics. And as such, it's still plagued with some pretty high recurrence and failure rates. A lot of that, I think, is due to the complexity of understanding the foot in 3 dimensions. And I often say, the spine behaves as certain segments. You've got your cervical, thoracic, lumbar, but they behave as units where every bone of the foot almost acts independently. And giving surgeons the ability to visualize that in 3 dimensions is going to be really, really critical to the future of foot and ankle. I think robotics is going to play a key part, but we also believe that software, the preoperative planning tool, is going to be one of the most critical advanced technologies that at least Paragon 28 plans to invest pretty heavy. We need to understand things like the balance of soft tissue, the function, the articulations, weight distribution, all of this in a 3-dimensional perspective. So Paragon 28 is looking at artificial intelligence, 3D and mathematical modeling, robotics, patient-specific instruments and implants. Those are just some of the pieces that we think are going to deliver better surgical outcomes and ultimately drive the future of foot and ankle surgery.
That's very helpful. And Jacob, obviously Medtronic, made a large investment in robotics for spine a few years ago with the Mazor acquisition. You have a lot of technology in the spine area, navigation and imaging. So I'll leave it to you, kind of how you want to answer the question. But I'm curious how you see the robotic piece kind of evolving for spine over the next several years.
Right. Thanks for the question, Larry. And I agree with everything both Albert and Benny have said. When it comes to spine, I think we are at an inflection point, where, we are seeing so much innovation in the last, couple of years in spine that it's become a really exciting place. And really, it's the convergence of robotics and robotic-assisted surgery and data-enabled decision-making and AI-enabled planning and personalized implants. That's going to change spine surgery in terms of making it more predictable and reproducible, and also driving better outcomes. So in robotics, we are seeing the shift from the early adopters of technology to now with a continued innovation in the applications and the clinical utility. We're starting to see a lot of the surgeons in the middle starting to use it and use it effectively. And then with our Medicrea acquisition, which is really around AI-driven planning and patient-specific implants, and then some of the smart technologies from wearables to smart implants, all of those working together with our enabling technologies in a single ecosystem that increases utility, that improves accuracy and precision, and helps our physician customers in achieving their goals. This is really going to transform spine, and so this is also going to differentiate ourselves. Companies that have the entire ecosystem are really going to stand out. And the innovation of just the implant or the next new widget, that's going to slowly, be less and less important. And that's why, to my earlier point around post-COVID, I see value-driven innovation, this entire ecosystem of care, that's really going to play a big role in transforming the entire industry.
That's helpful. And let's talk about kind of a transition to capital and the hospital capital environment. And I think Benny, you might have somebody touched upon it earlier. During the pandemic, hospitals were obviously suffering from a pause in elective procedures. What's your view on the current hospital capital environment? Do they have the budgets to pay for some of this technology? Maybe start with you, Benny, and I'd love to hear your view.
As I mentioned, right now, Microport Orthopedics is not in the space of robotic or the significant capital, but I can tell you that if we monitor what's going on in the industry, with all the big players offering robotic programs and competing with one another, one of the significant elements that was very effective in the early days of robotics, which was the marketing campaign, the ability to sell a robot and then work with the hospital on differentiation, that one is starting to essentially get eliminated and lose its power. Because now there's a lot of hospitals, especially in the major cities, the major metropolitan areas, that already have robotic programs. Some of them even have more than one of those units. Some of them have multiple of different types of units, just in order to be able to offer the patients a pretty much variety of services. So that element of the campaign does not exist to a certain effect, which reduces the appetite for the hospitals to actually make the big spending with respect to an ROI option. So what we're seeing is those who are engaging in the programs are either in it as a late player, late adopter, or these are the ones that actually are coming with, let's call it more creative financing options. Many of them are essentially what we're seeing right now as a trend in the industry are placed systems, where it's a system that is dropped in a hospital in exchange for business, exchange for volume, and not necessarily a completely upfront payment for the system. The end result of it is increasing cost of procedure to the hospital, which obviously is reducing their margins. In a COVID period where hospitals, as we mentioned, are, I would not say a financial crisis, but are feeling pressure on their financials, I think that we will see less appetite for significant dollar investment in those capital equipments, robotics, imaging, navigation systems, more focus on efficiency, more focus on the ability to actually deliver services with control over the margins. And that's, I think, a key element of the future of our industry, at least in the next 18 to 24 months, where the system will still need to stabilize and get back to normal.
Jacob, Medtronic sells a lot of capital in the spine area. What are your thoughts? Are there areas where you agree or disagree with Benny?
Absolutely. So in the early days of the pandemic, we saw a big slowdown in capital, and hospitals were hurting financially, and our teams couldn't go in and demonstrate the equipment. And so we saw that, but since then it's come back very well. And we've also partnered with our customers to offer, and to Benny's point, a whole host of financing options to kind of cater or tailor to their individual needs, from earnouts to lease rebate programs to a whole host of different options. And we have seen that really help through the tough times in the pandemic. Now we see a very strong recovery in capital, and I think if you just go back to robotics, the clinical utility of the robot has really improved with every new launch of software or technology we do, and that's also bringing that value is also driving the strength in the capital. So we see capital has recovered very well. In our latest quarter, we had, from our navigation to our imaging to robotics, we had very strong performance, and we continue to see a strong pipeline.
That's helpful. Albert, how will medium and small companies that don't possess enabling technology continue to distinguish themselves in the market, in your view?
Honestly, I don't think they will. I think if a company's too small to invest in that type of technology, or frankly, if it's just outside of their expertise, I think it's going to require people to get creative and find better partnerships and alignments that give them access to that type of technology. I just think the future, again, to be redundant on that topic, the future is going to be driven by this type of smart enabling technology. And we have to break this into its segments. We look at smart or advanced technology as preoperative planning, intraoperative support, and then a post-operative evaluation of the work, and comparing through artificial intelligence and deep machine learning, comparing that output to our predictive tools. And so I think this cycle of smart technology is definitely, it's got to be where smaller and mid-sized companies are investing their capital if they've got it. And if not, I think they need to be looking for better alignments.
Okay. I've had a bunch of questions emailed to me, and I've got a couple more to get through here. So I'm going to shift to the ASC topic. And I know Carolyn mentioned that that's the topic of a full webinar tomorrow, but I'd love to hear the panel's perspective on how you see that evolving for your area of focus. We have seen, a big shift to ASCs during the accelerated by the pandemic. How do you see the mix of procedures in the ASC setting to shift over the next few years? And I'm interested in the implications of that. There are a lot of implications. I think one concern is maybe, impact on price or margins for the implant companies. So, Albert, you went last time, so I'll give you a chance to go first this time. What do you think about the shift to the ASC setting for extremities?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and thanks. To be honest with you, again, we've got to break foot and ankle into its individual units, subunits, right? We've got such a diversity there. I mentioned like a Charcot case versus a bunion case. Bunions might be more appropriate for that surgery center environment, that outpatient setting where, Charcot is plagued with comorbidities and complexities that don't make those patients ideal candidates for the outpatient setting. And so I think long-term, each segment or sub-segment within foot and ankle is going to be treated differently. I think from a margin perspective, I always say if we can sell product effectively in Europe, then we can support the surgery center environment here. And for foot and ankle, at least the United States is around 55 to 58% of the global market. And so we do see a future in the surgery center. It's based on sub-segments. And I think you are going to see trends for things like total ankle replacement moving more to the surgery center as those patients tend to look for a more personalized, a more comfortable setting to have these procedures. And these procedures are getting faster and smarter. And so I would see some of those types of procedures shifting there first, or next would be a better way to say it.
That's helpful. And Jacob, a lot of spine and cranial procedures are more suited to the hospital, but some will shift to the ASCs. How do you see this evolving?
You're right. Spinal and cranial procedures have largely remained in the OR due to the complexity of the procedure. And historically, it was mainly simple decompression and ACDFs that were done in ASCs. But we're starting to see some of that shift. And we're starting to see a little more complex surgery starting to move to ASCs because of the benefits to patients and healthcare providers and payers And this is where I think a shift to more MIS is minimally invasive surgery is also going to drive that that shift because we have smaller incisions, they're less invasive, less blood loss, short, they require they can patients can leave overnight or even the same day, and the complications are coming down, and the other part of this equation is technology and automation. So robotic assisted procedures are very conducive to MI, to minimally invasive spine, because of how accurate we can get, and that also reduces all the other complications and blood loss, etc. So robotic assisted surgery is also going to help drive that trend. But now we do have to work with ASCs from a financial perspective, and so we are looking at options like to my earlier point around financial options, and that would work with ASCs. And finally, we do have some other products like some of our advanced energy products where we've seen a lot of adoption in ASCs.
That's helpful. And Benny, how do you think about the shift to the ASC setting?
Obviously, in the joint replacement space, we're seeing a significant push towards the ASC settings. It's driven by the fact that there's a opening reimbursement towards hip and knee procedures now in the ASC settings. And obviously during the pandemic, during COVID, surgeons who were sitting at home and couldn't really get access to hospital ORs or even get the beds that they needed for the patients, were looking for alternatives and found them in the ASC setting. So the environment was great in order to actually promote ASCs. We're seeing a significant increase in volume that is now taking place in the ASC. The challenge for many surgeons is unfamiliar territory. Now, many of them who have been used to working in a hospital where they get full services, and now they have to go into an unfamiliar private setting where they're essentially part owners of the service, and they have to focus on managing the complete episode of care, the complete services to the patients. So one of the things that we identified here is the opportunity to work and partner with those ASCs in order to actually develop a complete program that works with them, with those surgeons and the ASCs. We call it Pathways, which is really intended to help them with building those practices, focusing on tools that allow them to actually approach the patients, recruit the patients, manage the patient, deliver the services during the surgery, and then how to actually monitor the patient following the procedure, and as I mentioned, remote patient management. We actually also partnered with Patient IQ that is providing significant element of that patient management that gives you better controls, better ability to work and help the ASC with, or the surgeon at the ASC with controlling those episodes of care, which I think is a critical element of the ability to drive success in ASCs. Again, place of service in ASC is very different than hospital. Surgeons have to adapt to a very significant change in environment, and it's not a simple transition. So I think that's a significant element. If we're looking at the penetration, we're looking at we already are in the double digit with respect to volumes of procedures that are done in percents that are done in ASC environment as compared to the inpatient in the hospitals. So significant shift, and that's going to continue growing quite aggressively over the next years.
The reimbursement is lower, and oftentimes people believe that the ASCs are more price sensitive to the implants. How do you think about that shift and the implications for price?
So it's a great question. Again, people tend to think about the price based on components. And I think the way we prefer looking at it is the episode. What is the revenue opportunity for the entire episode rather than focus on a specific implant, specific consumable? That's our approach. We look at it in those terms, and we try to make sure that when we look at it in those terms, we're kind of within similar ranges, although ASCs are obviously more price sensitive and more cost conscious about it. But again, it's about how do you package it, how do you deliver a qualified service at a price point that is affordable to the ASC and is delivering the benefit to us as a company.
So MicroPort can monetize services beyond just the implant. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that there is a package that is delivering better value than just a specific component. Yes.
I got it. Okay, that's very helpful. I have a bunch of other questions, but I'm going to go to the questions that the people on the line have emailed me. One question here is, will hospitals and ASCs adopt device as service type payment to avoid large capital expenditures? Jacob, maybe I'll start with you because you talked about flexible financial models earlier in your comments.
Yes, absolutely. And we've had a few conversations with ASCs with that kind of approach where we look at, and I like how Benny called it, the episode of care, and so where we can construct different options based on what they can pay for. So we look at fee per use models. That's something that we're starting to look at. We can look at lease rebate models. So there's various options that make capital investments more acceptable to ASCs. And we are at the start of the journey because spine still, the bulk of our procedures are done in hospital settings. But as we see the shift, we are really aggressively looking at how we can adapt and because ASCs don't require a lot of what we provide hospitals, so even the offering itself is flexible and catered to the needs of the ASC.
Please discuss your views on the option of additive manufacturing to build implants. Not an area, it sounds pretty technical, not an area that I'm familiar with, but if any of the panelists want to jump in, please go ahead.
Yeah, I could chime in here. Paragon 28 just recently acquired the assets of Additive Orthopedics, which is exactly that. We believe that is a part of advanced technology, enabling technologies, and we do think patient-specific implants and instruments is going to be part of the future of foot and ankle surgery. So I think it plays a critical part. Curious to hear what the other panelists think, but that's at least Paragon's perspective, and we're investing in it.
Larry, what is additive manufacturing?
It's a 3D printing type of metallic implants, yeah, or bone segments or other opportunities like that, patient specific.
I got it. Thank you. Go ahead, Jacob.
I agree with Albert. We are investing in additive manufacturing as well, and we see that over time as we integrate data, in an AI and into the whole technology ecosystem, we'll be able to tailor our offering to based on predictive analytics, where we tailor it to the patient, the pathology, and even the surgeon and their approach. And so tying that with patient-specific implants, additive manufacturing just gives us the technology to be able to do that. And so that's an exciting, it's an exciting time in technology as well.
Benny?
Larry, I would like to add an interesting angle to the additive manufacturing. Obviously, there are benefits to the additive manufacturing with respect to flexibility, with respect to the cost effectiveness in certain elements. But what is very significant about it, it opens opportunities to design and manufacture implants that you simply can't do in a conventional way. There's certain designs that you cannot machine. There's certain elements in the design, struts or strength areas or qualities of material, metal that you need that you can't produce in conventional manufacturing techniques. And additive opens for the engineers the opportunities to actually focus more on the patient, deliver things that are better suited in order to actually fit the bone, and eventually get much better bone implant integration. Beyond this, obviously, the additive manufacturing provides with significant manufacturing flexibilities because you can essentially on one plate design different types of implants at the same time, and the machine will simply print them. Just the way you press the button on your printer in your office, in this case, you will print implants in a 3D, a little bit more demanding with respect to what you need to do as a setup and preparation. But in the end of the day, the machine can actually print the shapes and sizes and types of implants you need based on the specific needs. So it adds to manufacturing flexibilities, cost effectiveness, and improvement in the quality of implants that we can as an industry deliver to our patients in the future.
That's great. Thanks, Benny. One other question, interesting question that I got sent to me was, do you see demand for wireless technology to increase in the surgical theater? If so, in what surgical specialties and what types of procedures? Who wants to start?
I can take that one again if you'd like, but I'll tell you, sensor technology, I think, is going to play a key role in helping us better determine what proper alignment is, right? We have, in foot and ankle at least, there's some confusion about aligning things like a total ankle replacement, internal, external rotation, alignment with which axis, whether it's your tibial tubercle or your hip. And I think sensors are going to deliver accurate information to us, post-operative information to us about the accuracy of that alignment and honestly, the sensitivity to that alignment. We don't know where it becomes symptomatic. And I think sensors are going to play a key role in very specific indications, at least for foot and ankle.
Benny or Jacob?
Yeah, I agree with Albert. I think, and you know, specifically to Albert's point of sensors, we are in a unique time where that allows us to, you know, diagnose diseases, the disease, track the progression of the disease, the efficacy of the therapy, and monitor post-op. And then it gives us access to a tremendous amount of information that then we can build algorithms around, and then, you know, in a closed loop feedback to improve the therapy. And so we're just kind of touching the surface here. I think this is going to really transform healthcare and the outcomes.
Sensor technology, and specifically
sensor technology and data science. You know, the combination of the two.
Okay. And Benny?
So Larry, I'll take a slightly different angle here. I'm a very techie person, and I truly see the opportunity here for the companies, for the patients, with smart implants, with sensors that essentially communicate. The challenge that I do see here, and this is where I'm trying to put my business hat on and be more pragmatic, is we're an industry and we're driven by economics. And for as long as the reimbursement is not going to be around it in order to support it, it's just going to add cost to the system, which surgeons, physicians, hospitals will not be able to afford at the moment, because we keep adding more and more technology that adds cost to the system. But in an environment where the reimbursement is actually dropping, hospitals end up having to be creative about where the money is coming from. You touched earlier on services that are paid for. These are areas that I already heard surgeons talking about, the use of new technology and offering it for the patient, to the patient directly as an extra charge. I think this is where things will be unless our payers will step in and actually offer better payments, better reimbursement for better care. So again, trying to think about it in a more pragmatic, more financial way, which we all have to consider.
That's helpful.
So can I provide a slightly different view of that? I really think that this technology will help address the the overall cost of healthcare right now, because and I'm talking from the standpoint of spine surgery. Spine surgery today is more of an art than a science, and the outcomes are very variable. And so using smart implants, data science, and integrating that into the workflow, we can drive greater efficiency. So we have like patient-specific implants that can take a great amount of stress and time out of the stress of the surgeon, time off the surgery. We can predict the progression of the disease. So we have, like, for example, in spine, when you put an implant, the adjacent segments start to and fuse it. The adjacent segments start to take the load, and over time they start to degenerate. And so by optimizing the therapy using these technologies and also by predicting it, we can actually reduce the number of follow-up revision surgeries and so forth. So I think this, in the long run, is going to really play to the advantage of payers and health systems, where they can reduce the total cost of healthcare.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left here. It does seem, I think this is a manufacturing focused conference, I believe. So I'm curious about inflation. We hear a lot about supply chain issues, inflationary pressures. How are you guys thinking about that in your businesses? Is there anything you can share with us? It seems very topical right now. If somebody doesn't jump in, then I'll call on one of you. But Albert, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah. As of right now, and I'm knocking on wood, we haven't really felt much of an impact there. Paragon's our CAGR pre-COVID was around 52%. So growth is our biggest obstacle, and managing Q4 for us every year, which is a big jump. That's been the demand. So always fighting for capacity at different manufacturing partners has been a priority for us. But as of right now, we haven't seen much of an impact there, but we're cautiously optimistic.
Okay. Benny?
So Larry, there's, I would say, very conflicting schools of thoughts here around inflation. From one end, we see the federal bank holding the interest rates pretty much as close to zero as possible, believing that what we see right now is a transitional period, prices going up because of shortage, because of supply and demand, obviously. We've just seen what happened with the wood industry in the US, where prices spiked. And all of a sudden, within the last 3 weeks, the prices went down significantly, and people are saying that over the next month, it will go back to normal. So what we see here is a irrational behavior of supply and demand. People are nervous, and therefore they're betting on inflation. At the same time, again, the banks, the government are essentially holding the line, saying not going to happen. It's unlikely. But at the same time, also, obviously, when we think about the fact that the government is printing money every day, that's fueling the economy with cash that is going to fuel interest and inflation in the end. So we'll have to wait and see. As I mentioned, during this COVID, one of the things we learned is to really be super flexible, monitor every day what's happening, and adjust our response and behavior to what's happening on the ground.
That's helpful. Jacob, you get the last word here.
On inflation. So
Yeah.
I think my colleagues have really, Benny and Albert have characterized it very well. I don't have a lot to add, other than there are some anecdotal reports of wage inflation as well, but I don't see that as a long-term trend, nor do I see that as going to be as material to our cost structure, our overall. We're driving automation, productivity, and all of that. So I don't see that as an impact.
Okay. Well, we got 2 minutes left. Yeah, one lesson learned from COVID that you'll continue to follow post-pandemic, and a closing comment. If you can get one quick lesson learned and a closing comment, that would be great. Jacob, we'll go back to you.
So I think the big lesson is, the resilience and grit that our employees and our customers and patients have demonstrated during this pandemic. I'm really inspired by that, and I think that bodes very well for the future. And just as far as closing comments, I think coming out of this pandemic, we are seeing strong recovery. Innovation is going to be a key part in transforming healthcare, and we're seeing more innovation, value-driven innovation, and we're seeing more in spine than we've seen in decades. And I see a transformative and exciting time ahead.
Great. Albert or Benny, either of you can jump in.
Yeah, I'll say that I agree. And I mentioned in one of my answers before, I think we're going to come out of this with a much more modern work environment, honestly. And I'm in Colorado. We have a lot of millennials here, and we aspire to be in a dynamic and lively and modern workplace. And I think we've proven that the productivity is unaffected by that. So I could see that as the backside. I think we also got really smart about the finances of the business, and Paragon's been profitable since 2013. It's something we're really proud of, but I also found other opportunities for us to improve spending on travel and entertainment. I think I maybe over glamorized the importance of my face-to-face interaction in person. And I realized that we could do a lot through Zoom and other modern means there. And so I could just see the businesses coming out of COVID much smarter, much more nimble, resilient, to use your expression, Jacob, which I completely agree with. And I'm just proud of what we did and the way we were able to find ways to service cases outside of the operating room was really impressive.
Thank you. And Benny, you get the last word.
So if I get the last one, I'll pick again the resilience as a key element of what we've learned during COVID. Since the beginning of COVID, we made a clear decision as a company to actually do whatever it takes to sustain the business as is, keep the relations with all of our business partners, with all of our customers, even provide financial support to our distributors and our business partners in order to sustain them during this period, knowing that we will need to work together and we'll need them in the back end of this pandemic, ready to actually jump in and help us in the market. So that was a significant element for us. Beyond this, again, it's really about the flexibility, the ability to look at different types of communication, interaction with customers, and development of new services, new tools that were not available to the extreme at the beginning of the pandemic. And I completely agree with Albert. I think that we are coming out of this pandemic much stronger as a company and with better tools, better capabilities to actually be more competitive and be more attentive to our patients and customers.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for a great panel. Carolyn, thanks for the opportunity to moderate. I'll turn it over to you, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you all for what a really great and informative conversation. It's certainly an interesting time in the industry as we recover from COVID, and companies, as you mentioned, are adopting more technologies and responding to the differences in where procedures are taking place. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on where the market is today and where it's headed. I want to just give a quick thank you again to our sponsor, Orchid. And this session will be available next week on demand on the OMTech website. And as a reminder, you can also access registration for tomorrow's live keynote and the other 25 webinars at omtechexpo.com. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.